Hello everyone and welcome back. In this lesson we're going to begin talking about proximity analysis, which is pretty much what it sounds like. It's figuring out which features are near to other features based on a definition we provide of how near something should be. And if you remember, we already do have a tool that can do this. We used the Euclidean distance tool in the second course to create a raster of distance from something and getting farther away from it. But sometimes we want to find out how far away things are from something else, and Euclidean distance is good for that. And other times we want to find out which items are within a distance of something, and that's something Euclidean distance isn't as good at. We can do this more easily with buffers. Buffers may be a little foreign sounding to those of you in other professions. We talk about buffers being things that help other things to mix, whether it's chemical solutions or people who don't agree, having somebody between them as a buffer. In this case, we have a buffer which is an area surrounding something at some distance. If you remember the assignments in the first course, you did use a buffer in that course, but we never really taught it as a lecture. So we're doing that now and teaching the general concept of proximity analysis. So let's say in this case, I am concerned about the air pollution hazard to residents who live close to major roads. Now, there are minor roads that would run in between these gaps in these parcels here, if you recognize the parcels from the final assignment of course 2. But this major road here is going to have a lot more traffic moving at higher speeds and potentially have a lot more pollution on it. So let's say I'm concerned about that and I want to figure out who lives pretty close to it. Buffers are how I'm going to do that. So once again, we're in the analysis toolbox and then the proximity toolset. And we have a number of things in here. Well, first we have the buffer tool, and that's what we want to use right now. And again, it gives you nice little pictures here. So if we provided some points and put a buffer output, we'd get these rings around it. And as it shows, we can optionally have it dissolve these rings into single features so that when they overlap, they become one feature instead of multiple overlapping features. So this is one of the more complicated geoprocessing dialogues we've seen in these courses, but it's actually pretty simple if we go take a look through it. And only a few of these are required inputs. So we have to provide input features, which are the features we're developing the buffer away from. In this case, if I want to find out which parcels are near the road, I need to buffer the road. So I'm going to put in the Valmeyer roads layer as my input features, and it's going to suggest an output, and I'll name it in a moment because what I'm going to do is select a linear unit, and I can select the units it's in. So I'm going to make it in meters here, and we're going to buffer it by 300 meters. Let's see which parcels are within 300 meters of the road getting the air pollution from that major road. And now that I've chosen my linear distance that we're going to buffer away from the road, that's when I like to name the buffer, because in order to keep things straight, I usually put the buffer distance at the end of the name. And that way I always know that it's buffered by 300 meters in the name, and it gives me a little bit of metadata right there. And if I end up with multiple buffered feature classes, I can see at a glance which ones they are and kind of know maybe why it exists at all. One other feature I want to point out, though, that's not useful in this case, but that is often useful, is that we don't have to buffer all the features by the same distance. We can buffer them by a value from a field. So if I select field, I can select from a drop-down fields on Valmeyer roads. And in more complex geoprocessing workflows, that's really useful. Maybe some other process attaches buffer distance to it based upon some classification. Maybe a certain class of roads we want to buffer further because they're more polluting, so we want to see further away from them. So we could have used like field calculator to calculate distances on different classes of road, and then we'd use that field as our buffer distance. We have a number of other options down here to refine our buffer. We can select which side of the features to buffer and how the ends should come out, and then the method, whether we're using the geodesic distance or the planar distance. So this was basically equivalent to, are we doing it on the geographic coordinate system or the projected coordinate system, with potentially different results. So let's switch this back to 300 meters, and then I'm going to click OK to run the buffer. Then ran at the bottom of the screen there, And now I get this new feature class that is the buffer distance. And let's make that something that we can overlay a little more easily. And then let's make it semi-transparent so that we can visually see how it's overlaying the parcels. So I'll set it 50%. And now we can see that these parcels here are within distance of that buffer. What I might do next in a normal workflow might be to spatial join from the buffer to the parcels, and that way I have an attribute on the parcels indicating whether or not they're within that distance of the road. And that's how I'd mark the parcels that they are getting that air pollution or whatever it is that we're trying to analyze. Now, what if I have a number of different analysis units I want to work with? Maybe I know that certain things happen when people live within 300 meters of the road, but I know that some other things happen at 600 and 900 meters. Well, I can do a multiple ring buffer in that case. So if I open it up, it's basically the same as buffer, but it runs it multiple times at different distances. So I'll select my Valmeyer roads layer here, and then I usually do the same thing here. I'll do 300 meter, 600 meter, 900 meter. And in here, I'll put 300, and then 600, and then 900. Now add that there, and then I'll select the buffer unit again as meters. And then it's asking what name to put on output feature class, storing the distance for that particular buffer. Since we now have multiple buffers, we need a field to indicate which buffer it is. And I again get the dissolve option of whether or not it should make all the overlapping areas be contained. So like the 900 meter buffer has the areas of the 600 and 300 in it, or if they should be rings. So the 900 meter buffer is only the parts that are between 600 and 900 meters. So let's do that. We'll leave it as all so that we get specific rings. And let's take a look. I'll click OK and run it. Again, it runs in the bottom right corner there. And now it's done. And let's make it semi-transparent again. And I can see that from here we have the 300 meters and then the 600 meters and the 900 meters. And now we can see that there's actually a road even further out up here. So that's where that other buffer is starting to encroach. And just to demonstrate that these are rings and not overlapping, despite the fact that there's transparency here, so we can see that the green's not behind it, if I select that, I get one feature. It's a multi-part polygon, so even though these look like they're separate polygons, they all get selected as one feature. And I don't get any parts in here selected. It ends here and goes from here to here. And once again, we could use something like spatial join or intersect to attach attributes based upon our workflow to the parcels indicating their distance. Since we have multiple ring buffers now that have the field of distance, if we did a spatial join, all the parcels in this area would have a distance attribute that said 300 meters. And then all the ones in this buffer here would have a distance attribute of 600, and the ones in here would have 900. So we can get a little more granular. And if we didn't like the spread that all of these ones in here were labeled 300, we can make smaller buffers so that we get to ranges that are acceptable. Okay, that's it for now. In this lecture, I introduced proximity analysis using buffers and multiple ring buffers. These are great ways to find items that are within a specified distance of some other feature and fit into a lot of different processing workflows. They're really commonly paired with tools that attach attributes to other feature classes like spatial join, and those make for really powerful, useful, common workflows. In the next lecture, we'll continue on working with proximity analysis by looking at the near tool. See you there.